This is February 26, 2014. I am Janine Pullman at the wonderful home of Muriel Pinkus, who I have the honor to interview today so that she can share with us and the Dallas Jewish Historical Society her memories, her legacy, and her story. Muriel, why don't you begin by talking about your family, your parents?
Let me see. I was born in New York City in 1920. My parents, my mother was born in the States. Her parents had immigrated from Berdichev, which I understand was the Jewish suburb of Kiev in the Ukraine. My dad was born on a farm in rural Hungary and was brought to in 1888 and was brought to this country when he was 2 years old. His family opened a little grocery store on the Lower East Side in New York. And the way that I heard the story, they were very, very religious, really very religious. My dad had a thorough Hebrew upbringing. They baked matzah for Passover and sold it in the little grocery store. It was very good matzah, and it ultimately became a rather large company called Horowitz Margaretin, which was very well known by everybody in New York, but outside of New York it is not well known. But I do recall that when we first came to Dallas in 1950, I saw Horowitz Margaretin matzahs on sale in Minyard's grocery store here in Dallas. Later on, the company sold out to Manischewitz, and so Horowitz Margaretin became defunct. But when I was a kid, it was interesting that the head of the company was a lady named Regina Margaretin, and I believe that it was quite unusual at that time in the 1920s for a pretty good-sized company to be run by a woman. And I remember, too, that when we were living in Central America, I would fly up to New York to visit my folks. Driving by and coming in a taxi from LaGuardia Airport into Manhattan, where my folks lived, I saw a big building to the left, someplace out in Queens, Horowitz Margaretin, and at that time that was the plant. So it was kind of interesting.
So what type of influence did your parents have on you growing up?
I think that they made me very proud to be Jewish. I'm very grateful for the fact that when I was a kid, they sent me to Hebrew school. I can read Hebrew, and I understand enough of it so that I can really enjoy the services at my conservative congregation, Shearith Israel, here in Dallas. I'm very proud of that and very thankful for it. I frankly feel that we have a beautiful, wonderful, proud heritage, and it's very, very important that our children grow up knowing it. I think the saddest thing in the world is an ignorant Jew who doesn't know his own faith.
Growing up, did you have any special memories with your siblings?
Well, I was the oldest. I remember thinking that they tried everything out on me, and that was tough. There was just 13 months between my brother and myself, and my sister was 5 years younger. Sadly, I am the only one left of the three now. But we fought like a bunch of kids, and I do recall my dad was a lawyer, but he had no knowledge of child psychology. And when we kids would have a fight, he had an office in downtown Brooklyn, but he also had like an office in our house. And he would take us in the office and sit us by his desk, and he would have us draw up a contract that we weren't going to fight anymore. And of course, we'd have another fight after a while, so we would have to draw another contract. But anyway, that was how it was. but it was okay. We had a good life, and when I was it was during the Depression, and there wasn't any law business. My dad had a lot of time sitting in the office, so he ended up writing a book that was taken over by some law schools, and it was the royalty from that book that really helped out a lot during the Depression. I remember how very, very tough that Great Depression was, and I don't think a lot of people today have any realization of how hard that was on people. I think that people who grew up during the Depression will never forget it.
Anything in particular you want to share?
I think that my parents were both very proud of their Jewish heritage, and I think that that was one thing that they really left with me. That was, and that's wonderful.
So when did you meet Ralph?
Well, I went to Hunter College in New York, in Manhattan. It was a free school because they couldn't afford to send me to a paid college. I graduated in 1936, the depths of the Depression. I started college in 1931. And it was a very good school. I think I got an excellent education at Hunter College. And by the way, I have a good friend here in Dallas who was in the same grade that I was in at Hunter. And when I first met Ethel Bruin back 60 years ago when we first came to Dallas, she pointed her finger at me and said, "I know you." And I said, "You do?" And she said, "Julia Richmond High School and Hunter College in New York City." We had never been in the same classroom together, but this lady is a keen observer, which I am not, and she recognized me from just passing me in the hall, which I think is amazing. We're friends to this day.
And growing up and going to college, were there any special things? What type of things did you like to do for amusement? How did you get out, and what kind of things did you do with your friends?
There wasn't very much amusement that I can remember. I remember that things were very tough. And I remember that there was a lot of anti-Semitism. I remember when I was in college and I thought I could maybe get some kind of weekend job. I applied for a job at American Airlines thinking I could do something, and I was told that I had the wrong background. I thought that was really interesting. By the way, too, when we came to Dallas in 1950, I can remember a lot of that. I remember when we moved to Dallas, we had been living in Central America, and we brought a maid with us, a Guatemalan girl. And that gave me freedom to get out, and I worked as a Kelly girl. And I remember working at a place, going to lunch with some of the women. I'll never forget that they sensed that I was Jewish, and they started telling these anti-Jewish jokes. And one of the things they said was, "Oh, have you heard the one, if I knew you were coming, I'd have baked a cake." I can never forget that, and I thought it was horrible. And, it was very, very tough. And as I see the difference between then and now, it's amazing. And I don't think that our young people today know how tough it was then and how lucky they are to live in 2014. I remember that we were looking for a house, and we looked at a house, a little house, someplace over near Love Field. And as we were leaving, the owner said to me, "Well, one thing I want to tell you about this house, ain't no Jews on this block." That was Dallas in the 1950s. And it's a really different world today, and I think we have to give credit to the Roman Catholic Church, because I think that the leadership of the church, and particularly Pope Paul VI and John the 23rd, were very affected by the results of the Holocaust. And when the church came out with the Second Vatican Council was in the I think 61 to 65, and they came out with this wonderful document, Nostra Aetate, that says that you cannot blame all the Jews of Jesus' time or any of the Jews of subsequent times for the death of Jesus. Because I remember even when I was a kid, hearing Jews accused of killing Christ. And I think that the church really took the lead in diminishing anti-Semitism. I became active in the Anti-Defamation League. I speak Spanish because we had lived in Central America. And the man this was way back, in charge of interfaith relations for the Anti-Defamation League on the national level out of New York was Rabbi Leon Klinicki. Have you heard of him? Yeah. Leon was born in Buenos Aires. And so when he heard that I speak Spanish, oh, you've got to come to South America with me. And he was going periodically to South America to dialogue with members of CELAM. CELAM is the Consejo Episcopal Latinoamericano, the Latin American Council of Bishops. So yes, I was delighted to go with him, but I love to talk about my Judaism. And so 4 times I went. About 5 of us would go down there. We went to Bogota, Colombia, and then twice we went to Buenos Aires. And then the last time we went to Brazil, I didn't like that very much because they speak Portuguese, right. And I can't speak that. But I loved going to South America. Ralph has a lot of family in Buenos Aires. It was kind of interesting to meet his family. Yeah.
So why don't you skip back and tell us how you and Ralph met?
Well, I was living in Manhattan, and we lived within walking distance of the 92nd Street, the famous 92nd Street YMHA. And they had a lot of interesting programs there. And during the summer, every Wednesday night, they had a nice dance, did you know that? On the roof for young people. And so I heard about it. And I made a date with one of my girlfriends to go to this dance on a Wednesday night. I didn't have a boyfriend, neither did she. We wanted to meet somebody. And I was going to go. And then the day of the dance, Natalie calls me and said, I don't want to go. So I said, okay, I won't go either. My mom heard, oh, you go, you go, you go. Just to keep her quiet, I went. I went to the dance. And was standing there, and I see this nice, tall, good-looking guy coming over and asked me to dance. Oh, and by the way, when I was a kid, I was a Girl Scout, and I was always very, very interested in the nature study, And I went to Girl Scout camp in the summertime, and I loved the nature study, and I knew the names of all the trees and the wildflowers in the New York area. But I remembered, and I was a nature counselor at a kids' camp for a couple of summers, but there was one little wildflower there that I could not identify. And the camp was in a state park in Bear Mountain Park, and there was a little nature center several miles from our camp. And I remember that on my day off, I walked several miles to find out, because they had specimens of wildflowers in glass jars of water. And I wanted to find, it bugged me that I couldn't identify this little blue flower. So I walked down there on my day off several miles, and sure enough, it was a purple gerardia. So when I went to this dance on the roof of the Y, and I asked Ralph what he does, he said he was working at the New York Botanic Garden up in Bronx Park, and he was in charge of the tree and shrub collection. I said, well, what do you know about wildflowers? Oh, I know them too, he said. He was an Eagle Scout, and that was very impressive to me. And I said, well, can you recognize a purple gerardia? He said, oh, sure. I was very impressed with that. We both loved the outdoors. Yeah. Ralph loved planting things. I didn't particularly love planting things, but I loved walking through the woods and knowing the names of every tree and every bush and every wildflower that I saw. That was fun. And I could do that up in New York. Down here, neither Ralph nor I can identify any doggone thing. And it doesn't bother me as much as I thought it would. Maybe if I were younger it would, but when I'm older, whether I know it or not, I don't care. But when I was young, it was fun to know the names of things. So I was very impressed with the fact that he knew all that. On dates, we'd go out in the country sometimes and poke around. It was a lot of fun. He was a wonderful company and a wonderful guy.
And what brought you to Dallas?
We were living in Central America. We spent 7 years on a quinine plantation in Guatemala. And it was time to come back to the States. I had 2 little kids, both born in Guatemala. And Ralph was looking for a job. And we got the different trade magazines and answered some ads to people. And he got an ad with some florist in Dallas. And so we just came to Dallas. We had this job. He stayed for a little while, and he worked for another nursery, but he always wanted to have his own thing. So we ended up buying the land on North Haven Road. I found the land, wandering, driving around looking for a place, and we bought that land. There was no Jewish community center out there. People think we bought we came later, but no, the Jewish community. It was originally a big piece, like 16 acres, and we bought the 9-acre half, and there was a 7-acre half left. And a few years later, the Jewish Community Center came along and bought the other 7 acres.
So when you first moved here, where did you live in Dallas?
We didn't know where to live. We lived in Oak Cliff. We brought a maid with us, too. Victoria Figueroa was a very decent person. I had 2 little kids, and we thought it would be good to bring a maid. It was not a good idea. Toya was half black. Her father was an American black man who had gone to Guatemala to work on the railroad and married a native woman. And I had never, ever, ever been in a segregated society. I didn't know anything about it. And so we asked her to come to the States. So I thought it was a good idea. She could help with the kids. She thought it was a good idea. But when we got here, and we found this place was segregated, it was very tough for her. I mean, I can remember once she needed some dental work. I said, oh, Baylor University has a clinic. I'll take you there. It'll be real cheap. So I took her to Baylor to get some dental work. And they took one look at her and they took me aside and they said, I'm very sorry, we don't treat blacks. I mean, it was very, very, but she was a very good sport. She was a good person. She stayed a year. She said she'd come for at least a year, and then she went back. But she was a very devout Seventh-day Adventist. And every Saturday morning, Ralph would drive her down to South Dallas to go to the African American Seventh-day Adventist Church. And that was a big thing for her.
When did you join Congregation Shereth Israel?
We originally joined Temple. First we joined Shereth because I grew up conservative. But at that time, I did not like the rabbi. I thought he was opinionated. And everyone was raving about Levi Olin, who was the rabbi at Temple Emmanuel. So we went to hear Levi Olin preach a couple of nights. He was a marvelous, marvelous preacher. And we were just hooked, So we left Shereth Israel and we joined Emmanuel probably maybe 1951. We were members of Emmanuel about 50 years. And then I finally realized I'm really not a Reformed Jew. I can read Hebrew. I went to Hebrew school as a kid. I love the Hebrew service. I believe there is a God. And I love hearing the cantor chant in Hebrew. And I really enjoy the conservative services. So when we were members of Emmanuel, I remember, I became friends with Jordan Alfshire, who was a rabbi at Shereth Israel. I was part of an interfaith group that I needed a speaker on Judaism. And at that time, the rabbi at Emmanuel was Jack Bemperod. Oh, and yeah, I know it was. I was doing something with the Greater Dallas Community of Churches. And I went to speak to the executive director at that time, and we were talking in the conversation. He said, he had come to Dallas from Tulsa. He said, every time I do something with the rabbi ends up taking it over. Well, at that time, I knew that I liked Jack Bemperod. I taught Sunday school when Jack Bemperod was rabbi, and we got along fine. I liked him, but I knew that he would take it over. So I thought, well, who's low-key and really easy to get along? Jordan Alshire. So I called Rabbi Alshire, who at that time I did not know well. We became good friends later. And I asked him to help out, and he did, and he was marvelous. So then, and you know, I grew up considering myself conservative. We were never affiliated because we really couldn't afford the dues. But I did go to Hebrew school, and we considered ourselves conservative. So I feel much more at home in the conservative environment.
When did you start getting involved in the Jewish organizations?
Oh, it took a while because when we first came, you know, when you come to a strange city, I mean, we were gone for 7 years. Janine, I know what it feels like to be an immigrant. You know, in those 7 years, this country had changed a lot. Everything was infinitely more expensive than we remembered, and it was just different. And the Dallas community, you know, was not very welcoming. We had saved some money, but we were very thrifty. Ralph was starting from scratch, so we bought a very inexpensive little frame house in University Park. And, people were kind of uppity, especially at Emmanuel. It was difficult at first. So we became active in the North Dallas Chamber of Commerce. That was fun. The executive director was a very lovely guy named Gordon Rose. We liked Gordon very much, and we became active. Ralph was chair of the Parks Committee. I chaired the Education Committee, and it was a lot of fun. I had some interesting meetings with the Education Committee. I still have some of the old bulletins with my picture in them. Ralph was in the Parks Committee that Ralph met Neil Sperry, and they ended up being the impetus for the founding of the Dallas Arboretum. And Ralph was very proud of that, and I am very proud of him for that.
That's interesting. How do you think Dallas has changed over the years? What changes have you seen?
Tremendously. It was a nice little town when we got here in 1950, but it was very kind of clannish, and even the Jewish community that we saw in Emmanuel was extremely clannish. I think it's become there's been a big influx of newcomers, and I think that they have, we have changed the place so that I think it's much more open and welcoming now. I also think that the Christian community, thanks maybe to Second Vatican Council and the Catholic Church, I think Bishop Charles Grauman, who was a bishop at the Dallas Diocese, was a lovely man, and I got to know him quite well. And he was good friends with Jordan Alshire. And I think that there's been a tremendous change in the openness and the how shall I say, worldliness of the population.
If you were to share something with your grandchildren about your life in Dallas and what was important to you, what would you say is the number one and number two and maybe number three? Okay. What are those three things?
Well, what I would like to tell them is, for instance, the Talmud says, do not separate yourself from the community. Remember who you are and where you came from, and don't leave it. It's up to you. And it also says, it isn't in the Talmud. It's in Pirkei Avot. It is not incumbent upon you to finish the task, but you are not free from beginning it. So that if something isn't right for you, don't say, oh, that's no good, but get involved in something that's working to make it better. So I think that's what I would like to, and I think that they're like that. I think my grandson Jared, who is a lawyer in Chicago, I think he's involved in the community, and That's great. Aaron's young, but they do go down to that Chabad house downtown, and you know, they're involved. I think it's nice, yes.
Any special role models or people that influenced your life?
I think my husband, you know, my husband was a wonderful, wonderful guy. I kind of,
It's okay.
I miss him terribly.
I'm sure you do.
I think that I really grew up after I married my husband, you know. And I think the person that most influenced my life was Ralph.
Lillian, Muriel, this has been a wonderful experience for me. I appreciate very much you sharing all of this with me. And unless you have something else you'd like to tell us, if there's anything else, I'm going to turn off the camera.
Okay. What you're doing is such a great public service.
So this is a picture of Lillian.
No.
Sorry, start over again. This is this is Janine interviewing Muriel, and I keep saying Lillian. So you're going to have to do a lot of.
You have no idea how many times I get called Lillian.
Do you really? Oh, then I won't feel so bad. So this is Muriel and Ralph, and Muriel, tell the story of you and Ralph. Where you were, if you can remember where you were at this
I do not
picture.
remember where we were. I think it was before we were married, and we dated a lot. We dated for 1.5 years before we got married. We had a marvelous time together. I always felt just right when I was with Ralph.
It's lovely. So we're going to turn. This is a special album made by their granddaughter
Tamar.
Tammy.
Her name is Tamar.
And you can see there's a family picture here. This is Muriel's mom right here, and her father, and David. And then this picture over here, they're in the guillotine.
Outside of Washington, D.C.
Outside of Washington. And this picture right here, tell us about that picture.
We were living in Guatemala. We went in 1942. The war was on. And Ralph was working at the New York Botanic Garden. And apparently the Botanic Garden was approached by Merck, the American drug company, to go down to Guatemala and cultivate quinine. It comes from a tree, the bark of a tree, and they needed the quinine bark because Merck was a major processor of medicine for the malaria. At that time, there was no Ativan, and we had troops fighting in the Pacific who were contracting malaria. So Ralph came back from the Bronx Botanic Garden one day and said, "How would you like to go to Guatemala for a year?" They were afraid that I might be afraid to leave my mama. I thought it would be the greatest adventure. Ralph and I both loved adventure, and I was delighted to go. My mom was very understanding, and we were glad to go. So we went to Guatemala, and we lived on this plantation on the site of an extinct volcano. The way we got around was the back of a mule. We did not have horses because the roads were very steep, up and down, and dirt roads, dusty in the summer and as dusty as can be, and muddy as can be in the winter. The way Ralph had to put chains on the tires of the vehicle when he was driving because of the car would slip so much in the mud, and the roads, you're driving on the side of the mountain and there's a cliff going up on one side and the cliff going down, and one false step and you're down in the gorge, and you had to be very, very careful how you drove. So this was our house in Guatemala. We had a nice little lawn, and then Ralph had an amaryllis collection here, but he was propagating them. He always liked to propagate things and replant the seeds. So the blooms would bloom these most beautiful flowers, and then he would pollinate them and cover every flower with a little plastic bag so that the bees couldn't get at it and change his and spoil his pollination. So I end up with a garden of plastic bags.
And this is a picture of the family?
Yes.
Is that in Guatemala?
No, that was here because John was a baby when we came, and David was 6, so this was, I don't remember when we took that.
Okay.
But I think I had 2 handsome kids.
You did. And this was your last trip to Spain?
The last trip we went to Spain, yes. We can speak the language, and that was interesting. But I found the Spaniards very inhospitable, whereas the Latin Americans are wonderful. I like them very, wherever we went in Latin America, except Brazil, because I speak Portuguese and I couldn't communicate. But we speak the language very well. We're very comfortable with it. And any place I went in Latin America, except Brazil, I was very, very happy. But I found the Spaniards, I think they have 3 favorite expressions. One is no hay, that means there isn't any. They love to tell you, and another one is está cerrado, it's closed, you know. And the other one is no se puede. You go down, you can't do it, can't be done. You go down to the hotel dining room in the morning for breakfast, and you want scrambled eggs. No se puede, you can't have them, like we can't do it, only fried. You know, they're very, very uncooperative. I would never go back to Spain.
And just a few more pictures of the love of her life.
Mm-hmm. This is my boy, and my granddaughter did this book, and I think my granddaughter Tammy does a wonderful job. She puts together all these family books. My son David has a whole collection of them.
And this is a picture with your whole family, or most of your family. Show me who everyone is, please.
Okay, there's Ralph, and I think that was David and me and my dad and my mom and my brother Jerry and his wife Edie. Jerry is gone now, but I still talk to Edie. She lives in Utah. She's a lovely, lovely girl. And this was my sister, who was Gracie, who was a widow. My 2 siblings are gone now. I'm the only one left. But Gracie and her children, David and Elizabeth and Rebecca. And this is my son David's wedding picture with her parents. Their name was Parks, and Ralph and me. And Carol is a very lovely girl. I love her very much.
And tell me about this picture right here.
Oh, we went. I don't remember how we got out there, but this is that lake in Texas. I can't remember the name of it, but my kids would know, and other people would know. It's the only natural lake in Texas, and we went rowing on it. I just love to row. I was rowing. I like to row.
And you were rowing, and Ralph was relaxing.
Ralph was loafing. Yes.
Love it.
And this one was in Bruin, Texas. There's a little park. We were on the way down to Clarice and Julia Mears' 50th wedding anniversary party in San Antonio. I'll never forget that. We stopped there for lunch. Years ago.
Let's see. And this picture right here.
Oh, I think that was my 90th birthday. I don't remember what that was, but that's the whole family together. There's my son John and his wife Lillian.
It almost looks like it's a wedding cake.
But it was.
Was it an anniversary party?
Maybe it was an anniversary party. Could be. Could be. I don't. Maybe I'll bet you're right. I'll bet you're right. And then there's Aaron. And Aaron's girlfriend Pam, who's much prettier than that shows. And my grandson Justin. He's the son. And then Ralph. And my oldest son David. Justin is David's youngest. And then this is a cousin of Ralph's, the widow of a cousin of Ralph's, Barbara Pinkus, and then David's lovely wife, Carol. I think my son John must have taken the picture because he's not there.
Right. And let's see.
This was my 90th birthday. Because there's my old friend Ethel Bruin, who've been friends for 60 years, and her daughters. And then my grandson Jared, who came down from Chicago, he's a peach of a. You couldn't find a nicer guy. And then the old lady, and these were just people from the legacy that came to see what was going on.
I think I see Beatty Teitelbaum and Adolf.
Yeah, right.
How fun.
They're wonderful. They are wonderful.
And I'm looking to see if there was anything else we were going to show. Oh, this was the same picture over there.
Yeah, could be.
And this is another beautiful family picture. Right here. Muriel, this has been terrific.
Oh, this is not good.
Go ahead.
This was our 60th wedding anniversary, and we had a big party. We had a wonderful time. We were still living in the house.
Very nice.
Yeah. This one was the same day.
Right.
Yeah.
Very nice.
I don't know what to do with that dress. I wish I had it now. I may have given it away because I got that now. It would fit me fine now. The moral is never give away an old dress.
What is this picture of?
Oh, this was here, not too long before I lost Ralph. And my granddaughter Tammy was down here visiting from her home in Edmonton, Canada, and with her 2 children, Hunter, who's a teenager, probably about 15 now. He's a very, very, very nice kid. And then her daughter, Hudson, who, as you can see, is a pistol. But she's learning how to ride horses now, and she's learning how to jump. She's about 9. And then my grandson, Justin, who lives in Dallas. He's the youngest of my Tammy. This is my oldest son, David, and his oldest child, Tamar, and his youngest child, Justin. And then my son John, I think, took the picture, and then John's wife, Lillian, and Lillian and John's kids are not here. Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah. And then Tammy, wait. Oh, and then this is Ken, Tammy's husband, who is very unusual that they'll come together, but this time they did.
Nice. Let's see if we're missing anything else.
Oh, this was a picture that we took about a year before I lost Ralph. We were staying with David and Carol live in Gun Barrel City. We spent the night with them, and Carol took this. We were just sitting relaxing on the sofa, and Carol ran and grabbed her camera and came back with it.
This is a beautiful picture.
No, wait. Excuse me.
It says Finca El Naranjo.
Yeah, okay, yes. That was the steps of our house. Yes, I forgot.
Very nice. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I can see you. I forgot to take off the cap. Muriel, would you like to talk about Thanksgiving?
Well, Thanksgiving Square. Thanksgiving Square is an institution here in Dallas. People think that it's just a little park in the center of downtown Dallas, but it's infinitely more than that. There is a building on the park that has a very lovely little chapel in it, and that's used for weddings and different events. The building was designed by the famous architect Philip Johnson, and then there's an interesting meeting room downstairs. And when I was involved with the ADL, I had the idea of putting on an interfaith program because I said that Christians and Jews, and this was just Christian Jewish at that time, with the words that mean one thing to us mean something else, like Messiah, for instance, and redemption, you know, and salvation. And so we had a meeting, and someone invited Elizabeth Esperson, who at that time was the executive director of Thanksgiving Square in downtown Dallas. I didn't know anything about the square at that time, but Elizabeth was a wonderful, very interesting, and very able. Did you know her? Yeah. Able lady. She was a former Roman Catholic nun. I never asked her why she stopped being a nun. I figured if she wanted me to know, she'd tell me. But I never knew. But anyway, she was a really great gal. And we got involved with them. And then after I met Elizabeth, and after a while she called me and said that she was setting up a sort of an interfaith group, and she called it the Chapel Committee at that time. And I think it was because the founder, Peter Stewart, was not too enthusiastic about this interfaith council idea. But she got together a group, and I was part of it, and then Mark Herbener, who at that time was a Lutheran minister, today he's a retired bishop, and then Bishop Charles Grauman from the Roman Catholic Diocese was involved, and several, Israel Kalora, you know, the Roman Catholic layperson, and we met periodically, and we talked about our own religions, and it was very interesting. I always felt that there's tremendous ignorance in the Gentile community about Jews and Judaism, and I love to talk about the Jewish religion. When Levi Olin was rabbi here, when Emmanuel got a request for someone to go to talk about Judaism, very often he'd send me, and I love doing it. And so I was happy to join. So somehow I met Elizabeth, and she called me one day and said that she's setting up this group, and would I like to join? Oh, I'd love to. It's just the kind of thing I love to do. So I've been a member of this for many, many years, and now it has grown. We have people of every faith. We have Jews, Christians of many denominations, Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, Baha'i, and we got together. They put on events. We haven't done many. I have been very much less active, but I'm feeling better physically now, and I think I'm going to start going again. I haven't gone. I want to suggest that they need to do more programs. I think the last big program we had, I suggested it. We used to do, I think the first one we did, Mark Herbener suggested, it was on Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German minister, you know, who was hung by Adolf Hitler. And then after that, that was such a big success that they said, oh, we ought to continue doing these meetings. So I immediately said, let's do one on Abraham Joshua Heschel. Rabbi Heschel has always been, you know, my hero. I think that his books are wonderful, the way that he wrote about God and the Jewish concept of man's relationship to God. And so I said, well, let's do a program on Abraham Joshua Heschel. And then Joe Tyson, who's now a retired professor of religion at SMU, was there. And Joe said, well, we can only do one on Heschel if we invite his daughter, Susanna Heschel, to come down and speak. And at that time, I think Susanna was teaching at some college up in the Midwest. Well, she wanted an honorarium. I had to raise the money for her honorarium, which I did. And so she came down and she gave a very good talk about her father was a fascinating, fascinating man. I have several of his books. So then that was a big success. And so then they decided they will go on and do more programs. We have done a program on like Pope John the 23rd, Albert Outler, Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi. The last one we did, I suggested, it was on Reinhold Niebuhr, who was the great Christian theologian of the early 30s, who was, he had been very much influenced by Judaism in his younger years, and he and Heschel were friends. And so we haven't done any lately, but I want to suggest that we have never done one on a Muslim. And I read lately that there was a Muslim novelist who won a Pulitzer Prize. His name was Naguib Mahfouz. And don't know much about him, but we have a very interesting Muslim member of the Interfaith Council. I'm going to suggest to him, see what he thinks of it. I think that we're going to do one on a Muslim, and that may be the next thing we do. Ojalá, I hope so.
Thank you.
Ojalá is a Spanish word. There's no parallel in English. It just means I hope so. And it just comes out without thinking every once in a while. Ojalá, I hope so.
Thank you.
It's a neat word.